It's time for the final Precon video with Family Matters from Bloomburrow. Now, this deck features the new Offspring mechanic, which is included in the main set and in this set, and its front-facing commander actually gives any of our creatures this mechanic. So if you choose to make this deck, you don't have to rely exclusively on the Offspring cards, because there's actually not a lot of them in the colors that are here, and we'll talk about more about that later. For now, though, let's get into this deck, do some stuff to kind of make it a little bit better. And at the end of the video, I'll talk about which of the precons I think might be actually worth picking up and where you might want to invest your money in these precons. But before we do that, however, let's take this front-facing commander I already mentioned. It's Zinnia Valley's Voice. For a blue, a red, and a white. You get a bird bard with flying. It's a 1/3, and it says Zinnia Valley's Voice gets +X+0, where X is the number of other creatures with base power 1. Creature spells you cast have offspring 2. As I said in the open, this gives all of our creatures offspring, but it also has the potential just to one-shot an opponent with that first line, because a lot of this deck either has base power 1 by default, or the offspring copies themselves enter as 1/1s, boosting Zinnia's power rather effectively. The other new commander for this deck is Arthur Marigold Knight. For 2, a blue, a red, and a white. You get a Mouse Knight with haste as a 4/5 that says whenever it and at least one other creature attack, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You can put a creature card from among them onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order. Return that creature to its owner's hand at the end of combat. Some players online have said this is a toned down Winota Joiner of Forces, since it doesn't give the creature you find off of it indestructible, and it requires Arthur to be one of the attackers, as well as being harder to cast. That's still a very strong creature, and it will put in some nice work for us, but I do have a word of caution about this card. The creature you get off of this attacker has to survive combat to bounce back to your hand. That's the key feature of this legend, is being able to recast the creature later so you can give it offspring off of Zinnia or use its own inherent offspring ability, because you don't get to pay the offspring cost off of it coming into play off of Arthur because you're not casting the card. But it's still really good, and I'm going to leave it in the deck. So like with the other precons, we're going to go ahead and leave the front face at the lead and lean into Zinnia and see what we can add to the deck to make it even better. The great part about Zinnia is that it grants the primary feature of the deck to any creature we cast, so we're not lacking on things with offspring in the deck to work with, but I still want to go delve into the main set for some new additions, so let's get cracking. First up, we're going to go ahead and get some more cards from that main set, and that means something else needs to go, so let's start by removing Thopter Engineer. Without a bunch of artifact creatures in the deck, the haste part of this just feels kind of eh. And copying with offspring just nets you an extra 1/1 Thopter and not much else. We can do much better. Instead, let's slot in Warren Warleader. It's a 2 white white rabbit knight. It has offspring 2, and whenever you attack, choose one. Create a 1/1 white rabbit creature token that's tapped and attacking, or attacking creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn, and it's a 4/4. This is one of the offspring creatures from the main set, and the neat thing with Zinnia out, it actually gains an additional instance of offspring separately playable, and this applies to all creatures that have offspring that are already on the card. So for this, you can pay the additional 2 for the War Leader's own offspring triggering when you cast it, and then it has another version where you can pay the 2 for Zinnia, giving you a separate instance of offspring, and when it enters the battlefield, you'll get 2 copies of the Warren War Leader instead of 1. As for what the Warren War Leader does for us itself, we can either get these extra rabbit tokens, or we can get anthem effects whenever we attack that is multiplied by however many copies of this card we can create. So it may look like we have a bunch of 1-power creatures. Instead, when you have something like this going on, those 1/1s could all of a sudden become 3/3s or 4/4s, and your opponent's combat math can be seriously skewed. The second change is I'm going to remove Time Wipe from the deck. This deck has way too many board wipes in it for a deck that wants to flood the board with creatures. So we're going to slot in a new card that's going to appear in a future tech for Bria Riptide Rogue as well, and that is Season of Weaving. For 4 blue, it's a sorcery. Choose up to 5 paw prints worth of modes. You may choose the same mode more than once. 1 paw, draw a card. 2 paws, choose an artifact or creature you control and create a token copy of it. Or 3 paws, return each non-land, non-token permanent to its owner's hand. Since we're making token copies of most of our creatures, the triple paw mode on this is a much better sweep for us, because it leaves our offspring tokens on the board and allows us to recast the original creatures once we've reset Zinnia, giving us an additional way to reuse these offspring triggers. Ideally, I would actually copy Zinnia with the 2 paw mode along with the sweep mode, and then it would put Zinnia back to command zone, but you'd be left with the token copy on the board. along with all your other tokens and a handful of cards to recast that have offspring too, and then you'll be already set up to start recasting the next turn, or even if you have something cheap enough to cast alongside of it, to cast again this turn. The next change is a bit of a flavor win as well as an upgrade. Restoration Angel is a powerful card, but it is really only a one-shot effect, and instead we can get much more mileage and flavor out of Salvation Swan. For 3 and a white, Bird Cleric with flash and flying. Whenever it or another bird you control enters, exile up to one target creature you control without flying. Return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a flying counter on it at the beginning of the next end step, and it's a 3/3. So same cost, similar effect, and a much more flavorful win for the world of Bloomburrow, but in some cases this is actually better than the Resto Angel because the other birds that you have in the deck and other things can trigger this, which means the new enchantment Murmuration, which comes in the precon, which makes Storm Crows, can actually trigger this repeatedly, and the only restriction is it can only target non-flyers. Just remember, if you exile the stuff off of the crows coming in off of the Murmuration, you will not get your creatures back until the end of the next player's end step, because both of these trigger at the end step of your own turn. So there isn't a chance for that flicker creature to come back, so be careful you don't screw yourself on your blocking. Like if you were expecting it to come back as a flying blocker, you might have an unpleasant surprise right there. The next cut is going to be one of the Titans in the deck, Inferno Titan, because it's a little harder to use Offspring when the creatures cost 6 mana, and I'd rather keep the one that brings stuff back from the grave over the one that deals damage. And this way it will make room for the new heroic intervention from the set, Dawn's Truce. For 1 and a white instant, gift a card. You and permanents you control have hexproof until end of turn, and if the gift was promised, permanents you control also gain indestructible until end of turn. This is as close as we're going to get to a heroic intervention in white, and if you're going to go ahead and save your board, giving somebody a card is not a bad trade-off. And don't forget that you don't have to give the player trying to blow up all your stuff in a game of Commander unless they're the only one left in the game. You can gift it to somebody else and even play politics with it, extracting some promises from a different player in return for the card. Our next upgrade is also going to be another flavor win. Loyal Warhound is a good card, and it gets a new art for this release, but we have a better, more flavorful version of the card with Claim Jumper. For 2 and a white, Rabbit Mercenary with Vigilance. When it enters the battlefield, if an opponent controls more lands than you may search your library for a Plains card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Then if an opponent controls more lands than you, repeat this process once. And then it says if you search your library this way, shuffle, and it's a 3/3. So for 1 more mana, we get a stronger creature that can net us 2 lands instead of 1, and it's one of the Bloomburrow creature types. One of the questions someone had online that I noticed was, what happens to a creature from Bloomburrow when it goes through an omen path to a different plane? Do they change into a human like Ralzeric turned into an otter when he came to Bloomburrow? I believe this was actually a plant by WotC to show us what happens to a creature that fell through an omen path, because it is the only creature like this that we've had since the omen paths opened. An anthropomorphic looking rabbit with like clothing and, looks like a Western shooter. That's actually been in these sets since these omen paths opened. We've had other rabbits since then, like in Wilds of Eldraine, but they look like regular rabbits with just a little bit of fantasy elements. They didn't look like this guy, and it shows that they keep their animal forms, do their thing, and in which this case, this rabbit became a mercenary on Thunder Junction. Now, next up on the chopping block is Pull from Tomorrow. This is just a generic card draw spell, and it's not a very great one at that. We have better options that draw slower but could then net us more cards and are more flavorful in the deck. So we're going to use Caretaker's Talent from the main set. 2 and a white class. Whenever 1 or more tokens you control enter, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. So we get a token. Every time we make a token, we get to draw a card. So we're slowly just drawing cards. For a white, level 2, when it becomes level 2, create a token that's a copy of target token, so we can copy one of our other tokens. So any of our offspring copied stuff, we can make an additional copy with this. And for 3 and a white, level 3, creature tokens get +2/+2. We're going to be making tokens, so drawing off of this is very trivial. The other levels allow us to copy a strong token like an offspring copy of like Warren War Leader, or just straight up give all of our tokens +2/+2. All around, this card is just an amazing thing for this deck, and I think it will make you very happy if you choose to use it. Now, remember when I said earlier there were way too many sweeps in this deck? Yeah, even after I've made those earlier changes, there's still too many. So I'm going to chop out Aetherize and send it bye-bye. It has a fringe case where you could attack with your own stuff and then bounce the stuff back to your hand to recast to get more offspring triggers off of them, but that's not enough for me to want to keep it in the deck, and instead I want another offspring creature from the main set with Prosperous Bandit. For 2 and a red, Raccoon Rogue. It's a 2/2 with offspring 1 and has first strike. Whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, create that many tapped treasure tokens. Just like with the War Leader, Zinnia can give us a second instance of Offspring, and this is a good one to have around because each hit will net us treasures equal to the damage dealt, and as the buffs start stacking up, you'll get more treasures. This is just a very neat card in the deck. Our last changes are going to assist us in getting more tokens off of our Offspring abilities. To get there, Boss's Chauffeur is going to be my next cut. It's not a bad card, but it's not where I want to be with the deck because it requires dying to actually get what we really want from it, which are the 1/1 tokens to buff up Zinnia's power, but it really doesn't do much else for us otherwise. So instead, we're going to try and improve the Offspring for ourselves with Panharmonicon, 4-colorless artifact. If an artifact or creature entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, it triggers an additional time. So basically, any ETBs trigger twice. The ability for Offspring is kind of weird in that you pay for the ability on cast, but you get it as an entering trigger if you paid it. So it's kind of like Kicker, which means you get all these ETB trigger doublers to do things for us like Panharmonicon, and you can get 2 Offspring tokens for each creature you've paid into. And then that leads us to our last change of the deck. I'm not enamored with Shield Broker in the Precon. Being able to swipe a couple creatures is nice, but it's quite fragile. One board wipe, you'll not only lose all your stuff, but those creatures will be safe because then the shield counters will protect them and then they will go right back to their owners. And I'm not a big fan of that, not great. So instead, we're going to be token doubling with Anointed Procession for 3 and a white enchantment. If an effect would create 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many of those tokens instead. Now, this one is expensive, but just like with Panharmonicon, it doubles up our Offspring tokens. I chose Procession because I own a copy of it, but sub in whatever token doubler you want to use or have access to, such as Mondrak, O'Hare Talk, or you could even slot in another ETB doubler like Virtue of Knowledge as a much cheaper option. Any way you go, it's going to improve the deck. So those are my changes I wanted to make to the Family Matters Precon. Let us know down below what you think of that. Now, as for the other Precons in conjunction with looking at this one, what do I think you should get? Well, as for value, these are actually very tightly close together. The Squirrel Precon has the most value in terms of new prints and reprints in it, but it's only about a $15 to $20 difference in terms of the monetary value of the cards going down the list as of today, which is the day of the pre-releases when this is being recorded. And it's just going to get, the disparity is going to get smaller as things go on. So all in all, monetary wise, don't worry about the money. That's not a big concern. What it is what you want to play with. What is your favorite color combination? What do you want to get out of the deck? If you like messing with tokens, then I would either do the Squirrel deck or the Family Matters deck. Both of them are great token decks. If you're in for control or maybe even king making, the Peace Offering deck is a great option to go with. If you're more into just smashy, then go with the Animated Army deck. Animated Army is kind of a unique deck in that it gives us an option that red-green never really had before in animating enchantments and artifacts. That's usually something reserved to blue or blue-white kind of things. So that one, if you're into something completely different, it's really good. My only issue with that deck is it contains a lot of stuff that is generic big fat beaters, and it's like they just kind of filled in the deck with like big smashy stuff instead of trying to bolster the animation part of the deck. All in all, I love these precons. A lot of them surprise me. Like the Peace Offering deck, I was surprised by that deck. I didn't even think I was going to like that deck, and it's actually kind of fun to mess around with. I was doing some playtest draws in the deck building stuff, and it's actually kind of fun. So whatever you choose to do, you can't go wrong. This set actually is seemingly very balanced in terms of what it has going on. So with that said, please let me know what you think down in the comments below. And while you're down there, please like, share, comment, subscribe. All those things help my channel grow. And as always, thank you for watching. Have a great day, and I will see you in the next video.